This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate what a Fem Naruto makes Itachi fall in love with her. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
It was the end of the Uchiha line. As Uchiha Fugaku watched his sons, that was the only thing on his mind. One might assume they were flawless at first glance. Both of his sons possessed exceptional intelligence, good looks, poise, and composure. He took pride in them both. From the beginning, Itachi was a prodigy who excelled at everything he set his mind to. Itachi proved to be such a remarkable young man that he had lost count of the praise he had received. Then Sasuke appeared. Sasuke's own genius had not been immediately apparent. Sasuke was not the right person to take over his company, but Itachi had been ideal. Although it was not immediately obvious, he was more passionate. Music was the source of his genius. Sasuke left his own legacy, but Itachi continued the one his grandfather had started. He developed into a musical prodigy with a wide range of nearly magical talent. There is no way that Fugaku could have been more proud. That is, until they informed him that they had no interest in girls and would not marry for the sake of the clan alone. Don't misunderstand him. Although he did not mind that both of his sons were gay, he harbored a strong desire to see grandchildren. He envisioned young Uchiha children bringing a brightness to their ancestral home that had been lacking for many years. He hoped to see his sons get married and start a family. If Sasuke and Itachi had been in committed relationships with their respective male partners, he would not have objected. In order to carry on the Uchiha tradition, he would not have objected if they had adopted children. If they were happy, he wouldn't have cared. This erratic switching between partners was something he disapproved of. He was unable to put up with the shallow, pointless relationships that were founded only on sex. His sons were entitled to something far superior. He didn't bother urging women to approach his sons like Makoto did. He also didn't try to explain to them why he and Makoto wanted them to get married. He let them make the error of believing that family didn't matter. He knew they would soon realize how meaningless their lives had become, so he would let them enjoy the wealth and notoriety they had built up. Itachi paused, his brow raised in interest as a gentle female voice said, Sasuke-kun is going to be very irritated. He is, of course, he is. I promised the bastard that I will be there an hour before it started. He is going to be mad at me, not you. I am going to be grilled just because Ino takes too much time trying to get ready for her Sasuke-kun. Said another female voice, this one strong but somehow light. With a hint of amusement, Itachi laced his fingers before his lips. Don't call Sasuke-kun that. The initial voice snapped back, honestly. We're polite to him. We don't irritate him as much as you do. We don't drag him into things that he would much rather not be doing like you do, and he still won't give us a moment of his time. However, if you step out his sight for even a moment, he starts twitching. If anyone so much as looks at you wrong, he starts glaring. I don't get it. The first female voice sighed with disdain. Itachi furrowed his brow in curiosity. Was his brother the subject of their conversation? The male voice added languidly, the Uchiha has a sister complex. He sounds more like a possessive boyfriend to me, Shikamaru. A different man replied, I can't blame him. Noriko-chan is hot. He thought the girl was Noriko, and she hissed, Kiba. You little shit. Sasuke is not my boyfriend. He is Jew. Before the phone abruptly rang. Itachi leaned back to listen more intently as she swore, damn it. I am gonna kill Ino, it's Sasuke. Oi, Teme. I am coming. She sighed, why the hell are you so impatient? There was a moment of silence, it isn't my fault. Ino, Choji, Neji, Tenten and Hinata are not here yet. She clarified. Neji chose to drive them to the meeting point, but they are held up because of Ino. She angrily hissed at him, you are so inconsiderate, Teme. Itachi's lips curled in laughter. She paused and then stammered, Nani? That's before being interrupted, Suke, you are. There was a sigh. Fine, you stubborn ass. I can't just leave them here. Neji and I are the only ones who brought our cars. See what I mean? Kiba's voice was heard laughing. What did he want? Noriko exhaled. He says that Neji already called him. Something came up, so he and Hinata are going to be late. Ino, Choji and Tenten will be here in half an hour, but the bastard simply can't wait that long. Says that he is on the verge of killing somebody. If I don't go, he just might end up committing murder. So you are leaving now? The other girl said with a sigh. A faint tinkling sound accompanied Noriko's apologetic murmur. Sorry, Sakura-chan. You know how irritated he gets after those press conferences of his. Shino, you are the only person I am going to trust. Take care of my car and do not, under any circumstances, let Kiba drive. I will take a cab. Are you nuts? Kiba yelled abruptly. The Uchiha will kill us if we let you travel across the city alone looking that sexy. Itachi looked over his shoulder at the woman who was now standing and tilted his head slightly. Her hair was the first thing he noticed about her. It had a sophisticated looking knot tied with a rare shade of pale, shimmering gold. She wore a very elegant dress in a dark blue that nearly looked black. Her sparkling blue eyes added to her stunning appearance. She didn't fit it, though. The carefully applied makeup, high-heeled shoes, hairstyle, and dress all exuded restrained elegance and conformity. They stood in stark contrast to the vitality he perceived in her eyes and the casual tone of her voice. She was explosive, unbridled, vibrant, and organic in every way. She was not at all comfortable with that very controlled sophistication. Look, she grumbled, I do not want to put Sasuke in a foul mood. He needs to stay level-headed tonight if he wants to inform his father about his decision to marry Haku. He is agitated, I need to be there with him. Who was this Haku? Itachi's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Uchiha, the elder, frowned. When Sasuke was just 15, Itachi left for school overseas, and he and his brother had parted ways. But they'd always been the kind of brothers who supported one another. Knowing that he was ignorant of Sasuke's private life did not sit well with him. Did Sasuke anticipate that he wouldn't have his back? Whatever amusement he had derived from the illuminating exchange was tempered by his worry about Sasuke. Before attending Sasuke's party, he had entered the cafe with the goal of taking a break after a demanding workday. It had never occurred to him that he would discover information about his younger brother's life that he had not been aware of. Itachi paid the bill and followed her out of the cafe as she began to leave. After all, they were going to the same place. He could take her to the celebration. Before she could raise her hand to hail a cab, he called out to her, "Excuse me." Her eyebrows arched in mild surprise as she turned to face him. Despite her narrowed eyes, she asked him cautiously, "Yes?" Sasuke looked a lot like him, and Itachi was positive that she recognized him. "I am Uchiha Itachi." He gave his details. Her eyes widened, and she said, "You are Sasuke's older brother." She then gave him a small smile and said, "I'm Namikaze Noriko. It's nice to meet you." "I imagine that you are heading towards our parents' home," Itachi said, returning the smile with a slight smirk. "I know." He whispered in a tone of amusement, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." "Yes," said Noriko, nodding. Glancing at her watch, she scowled and said, "I'd better get going." Before she could go, he interrupted, saying, "Speaking of which, I am heading there as well." He told her, "If you do not mind, I can escort you. Your friend was right, it would be unwise for you to travel by cab when you were dressed so well." He made a vague gesture toward her plain but clearly pricey diamond piece. She had a mildly irritated look on her face as she looked down at herself. She whispered to herself, "The things I do for that bastard," but Itachi heard and gave her a small smile. "Namikaze-san?" He asked him. "Sorry about that, I am not entirely comfortable wearing such things," Noriko said with an apologetic smile as she looked up at him. "As for your offer, thank you. As you stated, it would be unwise of me not to accept," she said sheepishly. After giving her a nod, Itachi offered her his arm and pointed to a shiny black BMW, saying, "My car is parked right around here." Before he got into the car himself, he opened the passenger side door for her. As they drove to their destination, she inquired, "Sasuke told me that you have just returned from England? It has been 2 months, hasn't it?" "Yes. Nearly 2 months." Itachi looked at her and nodded, saying, "I did not know that Sasuke had so many friends." She looked at him questioningly and said, "If you overheard our conversation then you know about Haku. Believe me, if I had left it up to him, he would have only one friend." She acknowledged, "They are all actually my friends. Sasuke is only just starting to warm up to them." With his gaze fixed on the road, Itachi nodded. "Whatever it is, Sasuke will have to tell me about it himself." He said, "It is his tale to tell." He had very little patience for gossiping girls, particularly when they involved his brother. "I did," he said, with a slight frown on his smooth features. She smiled at him unexpectedly. She turned away, her soft face glowing with approval. "Just give him a little time to reconnect with you," she said, her smile turning thoughtful as she said, "Sasuke will tell you. He respects you more than anyone else." With a quick look at her, Itachi said, "You know him very well." The smile on Noriko's face softened as she said, "Yeah. I guess we connected on some level instantly." She shrugged, looking fondly amused. "Maybe it was because I was the only girl who wasn't drooling over him or the fact that his attitude and his glare did not work on me. Or maybe, it was because of the music that connects us." Itachi asked, "You went to music school as well?" with a raised eyebrow. Noriko wriggled her fingers at him and smiled, saying, "Yeah. I have magic fingers. Any instrument I play produces the most beautiful of sounds. Itachi gave her a playful look and said, I see that you do not lack modesty. He could understand why Sasuke had made her a friend. She was very entertaining. Softly chuckling, yeah, well, I have been somewhat of a musical prodigy. She grumbled, that frustrates Sasuke a bit, I guess. With a grin on her face, you must know that Sasuke is a bit crazy about classical music. He has the right personality for it, you know. That grace and elegance along with the patience to learn and master complicated compositions. Me, she sighed, I am more of a free spirit. I love to experiment. Sasuke doesn't like it that I mix classical with modern. He says that it corrupts the music that is meant to be so graceful and soul-stirring. With a thoughtful mutter, Itachi said, you do not seem the type to listen to classical music. Noriko's face suddenly twisted into a grimace. This is the stereotype that I do not agree with. She responded, music is so diverse and beautiful that it can connect with different kinds of people. Classical music does have a lot of interesting and funny compositions as well. She appeared thoughtful. I believe that people have started to associate classical music with the rich and the classy. I guess that they have forgotten music as a universal language that everyone can appreciate. You feel strongly about this, don't you? Itachi asked, glancing at her before turning to face the road. You are just like Sasuke. He is silent most of the time, but when you mention music, he simply seems to erupt. He said, clearly amused, it started when he was a child and mother played the piano for him for the first time. Since, Noriko's cell phone rang. Before getting the call, the young lady rolled her eyes. She questioned impatiently, just how many times are you gonna call me, Suke? Dobi. Where are you? Noriko murmured, I am on my way. I met your brother at the cafe and offered to drive me. I left my car with Shino so that they don't have to take the cab. Noriko only noticed that Sasuke was frowning. You met Itachi? Are you sure he is Itachi? You have never met Itachi? She narrowed her eyes angrily and snapped, I am not stupid, you know. And he whispered, I want to talk to him, one wonders. After frowning, Noriko gave Itachi the phone and said, the bastard. Itachi furrowed his brow in deep amusement, Uto. A sigh of relief was heard. It's really you. Thank you for picking her up, Ni-san. There was a bit of shuffling at the other side. Last time she almost got into the car of someone who proclaimed to be sent by me to pick her up. Who knows what that stranger would have done to the Dobi if Neji hadn't held her back. Itachi didn't say anything about that. The two had a rather intriguing relationship. We will be home in around 30 minutes. He said, do not worry. I will deliver your precious friend to your hands, safe and sound. Oh, for the love of God. Noriko moaned in frustration, and I am not some 3-year-old kid, you know, it is just across the city. When Itachi heard Sasuke scoff, his lips quirked. Just bring her home, Ni-san. He handed Noriko her phone and said, I will. He grinned when she cursed Sasuke and hung up. The two of you are quite close. With a sigh, Noriko closed her eyes and leaned against the window, saying, well, he has basically adopted me. She admitted, I was 13 and a mess, my father had just passed away, and my mother had fallen into depression. She sent me away to music school because I inherited my love for it from him. She played with a strand of blonde hair, saying, both of us instantly developed a rivalry, until I came along. He seemed to have no competition. With a faint, amused smirk, she said, but we were on par and often, our teachers could put us together in competitions and concerts. I was the violinist, and he was the only pianist who could compliment my violin according to them. She smiled softly, he became my anchor, I guess. I used to lean on him a lot. She smiled at Itachi and said, that protectiveness stepped in when other boys decided that I wasn't just some tom-boy musical prodigy but a girl. Has he ever told you about the number of times he has punched guys who dared to step a little too close to me for his comfort? You said he adopted you, Itachi asked, looking at her, laughing and shaking his head. What do you mean by that? He asked. She sighed, my mother passed away a year after my father did. She took a breath, that left me rather lost. My father left quite a large legacy behind, and with my mother gone, there was no one to look after it. It was a big decision, whether to give up music or not. She glanced out the window and turned away. It was like asking me to breathe or not. She murmured, in the end, I decided that I could still pursue my interest in music but have a professional career and it was out of question. Itachi exhaled in surprise. She would have been devastated by that choice if her love of music had been as strong as Sasuke's. She grinned and muttered, Sasuke did not approve, said that he could not see me making the same sacrifices his brother made. Itachi froze, gripping the steering wheel more tightly. Sasuke. We had a fight over it but there was nothing I could do. I did my master's in business administration to handle my father's large real estate development company while he grew to be a world-class pianist. She sighed, but I did go through a period of absolute chaos. She laughed. Life was such a mess that if it hadn't been for Sasuke's care, I wouldn't have made it out in one piece. Did that tell you enough about your little brother? She asked, smiling at him. She smiled at him with a certain lack of reserve that he rarely saw in women of her apparent success and power when he looked at her in surprise. It was refreshing because she was so honest. I did not tell you life story just like that, you know. She raised her eyebrows at him. Sasuke misses you a lot but won't admit it. You are curious about his life that you have drifted away from, but you will not ask him. She laughed. I am an expert in all things Uchiha. A little taken aback by her insight, Itachi turned and pulled into the driveway of the ancestral Uchiha house. As he turned off the engine and turned to face her, he said softly, "Thank you." This Haku, he trailed off. She was a trustworthy individual, and he had moved past his early misgivings about her. As a very good person, she responded with understanding. To be honest, I wasn't so sure about them before. She laughed at him. I am very protective of him as well. However, Haku, he is patient and gentle, a little odd perhaps but very beautiful as well. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Beautiful?" Noriko laughed. She shook her head and grinned as she got out of the car. I can find no other words to describe him. I mistook him for a girl when Sasuke first introduced me to him. Haku is an internationally renowned designer. She continued, not exactly a match made in heaven since our Sasuke doesn't know anything about fashion world. As they made their way to the door, Itachi arched an eyebrow at her. And you do? Me? Fashion? She exclaimed, shaking her head. My favorite color to wear is orange, Itachi-san. I think you can infer the conclusion from there, she said. Itachi shook his head in amazement and grinned. He had never encountered a woman who was so approachable. In a matter of seconds, he was relaxed, herself, assured, sly demeanor grabbing his interest at once. Noriko rolled her eyes as an impatient voice cut them off, saying, "Took you long enough." As she stepped forward and watched him with concern, she muttered in frustration, Sasuke looked calm and sophisticated as ever, and his clothes were spotless. Itachi, though, noticed the faint trace of anxiety that few could see. Noriko scowled at him, so it was obvious that she could. She whispered to him, "How do you plan on doing this?" And Sasuke looked at Itachi and raised an eyebrow at her. She grinned. He knows about Haku, not much, but a portion of it. He squinted at her and said, "You told him?" Sasuke turned to Itachi with the question clearly visible in his eyes after she nodded. Itachi narrowed his eyes and said, "Whatever you decide, you have my support, Otudo." He then nodded elegantly and said, "However, I will reserve my opinion on this Haku of yours until I have personally met him." With a cheeky grin and a giggle, Noriko said, "Welcome to my world, Suke." He scowled at her and then sighed a little. "I am going to pop the question to Haku after tonight's party," he said, running his fingers through his hair. "But first, I need to persuade Tu-san and Ka-san to accept him as a member of the Uchiha family." He turned to face Noriko and said, "He deserves respect and complete acceptance, Noriko. I know they will be upset with my choice, but I cannot do this without their approval. Their opinion matters to me." Noriko stepped forward and put her arms around his waist, whispering, "Of course, it does." Naturally, Sasuke turned his head slightly to press his nose against her hair in response to the embrace. Evidently comforted by her aroma. "They love you, Suke. You have nothing to worry about, I am sure they will support you." Sasuke laughed. "There is a limit to their tolerance and I have been testing that all my life. I can't help but feel that this would be the last straw." "Are you certain you want to marry this person, Sasuke?" "Absolutely certain?" Itachi asked, looking at his brother's deep gray eyes gravely. "Don't ponder too much over this." Itachi surprised Sasuke by saying, "I will be there with you and we will try our best to convince mother and father that this is what you desire most." With a firm and determined voice, Sasuke nodded and said, "Yes, Ni-san. Haku is very important to me." After examining him for a long time, Itachi nodded elegantly and said, "Very well." He whispered, "Let us go in and face the music, shall we?" To both Sasuke and Noriko, with an odd desire to yank her from his brother's embrace and into his own. He scowled inwardly and extended his hand to her, feeling that strange feeling fade as her tiny hand slid into his. As they entered the house, he thought, strange. "I have already told them that I have something important to discuss." Sasuke told them, "They're in the study." He looked at Noriko and said, "I told them that we must wait for you and I think they misinterpreted." "Oh dear." Noriko muttered, instantly understanding what he meant. "And you let that misunderstanding stand? You do realize that it would only make explanations more difficult for us?" She asked Sasuke, with a slightly irritated and sullen expression? Itachi raised a brow, looking down at the woman on his arm. Why would they misinterpret? Both Sasuke and I have declared our lack of interest in the opposite sex quite clearly. Noriko gave him a startled look as Sasuke coughed. Sasuke, Noriko began gently, I didn't know that I was such a big secret that not only you but even your parents did not tell Itachi-san about me. The younger Uchiha hesitated, took a cautious look at her, and then turned to face Itachi. Ni-san. Mother has practically declared to the world that Noriko is going to be her daughter. Law despite everything, and father, he said, grinning at Noriko before adding, you will just have to see. After giving him a sneer, Noriko moved forward to knock on the door of the study. After receiving permission, Noriko gave Sasuke a fierce look before entering with a modest but genuine smile on her face to greet the older Uchiha couple. With a smile, Makoto stepped forward to cup Noriko's cheek and said, Noriko-chan. Her dark eyes swept over her. The woman gushed, how beautiful you look, in a whisper. When Noriko kissed Uchiha Fugaku's cheek, he stepped forward, his lips quivering slightly, and a rough voice said, yes. While she does look beautiful, she doesn't look like our Noriko. HMPH. Sasuke grumbled, our Noriko is an orange clown. I think I like this version better. At least she was considerate enough to dress properly for the party. Thank God for small favors. To Itachi's delight, Makoto scowled and scolded, Sasuke. Their father's cold glare enforced the reprimand. You treat her so abominably that it is a wonder why she even considers you to be a friend. In addition to greeting his parents, Itachi stepped back to lean against the wall and observe how the blonde woman energized his reticent family. More animated than Itachi had ever seen him, Sasuke was engaged in the discussion. He scowled when Noriko made a clever retort, taunted her non-stop, and sent her sarcastic smirks. His father was surprisingly smitten with Sasuke's friend. That's when Itachi realized why Sasuke wanted Noriko to accompany him. Their father was calmed by her. In both words and deeds, Fugaku treated her as if she were his favorite daughter. The loving glances, the slender scowls at Sasuke when he behaved crudely, the tiny grins when she spoke to him with enthusiasm. The idea that this woman had assimilated into his family without his knowledge while he was away was unsettling. Furthermore, it was unsettling to realize that she had improved them all. Had he become so estranged from his family that he had failed to recognize such a significant figure? When Sasuke rolled his eyes at his mother's dramatic remarks, Makoto frowned and said, Itachi, what are you doing standing there in the corner? Come, can't you give your poor mother the pleasure of hearing your voice? Noriko laughed. Itachi just sat down next to Noriko, arched his brow, and gave Sasuke a stern look. They both knew that Sasuke was stalling, so the younger woman nodded and gave him a look. Following a brief sigh, Sasuke turned to face his father and said, San, I have something of great importance to share with you. When Fugaku saw Sasuke's nervous features, he stopped and gave him a raised eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, a frown of suspicion formed on his dignified features as his eyes strayed to Noriko. After swallowing, Sasuke began to speak softly, Father, emphasizing, there is this person that I love. He, Makoto gasped, and Fugaku turned to face him without saying anything, is the only person I can see myself sharing my life with. His name is Momochi Haku. How in the world did you end up meeting and getting involved with a designer? Makoto blurted out, the designer. Keeping his eyes on his silent father, Sasuke shook his head gently and said, that is the story for another time. I wish to give him my name. I wish to make him a part of our family. Aware of Noriko's hand on his arm, Fugaku said bluntly, you want me to put his name on our family registry. With hesitation, Noriko began, San. I can vouch for Haku-san's character. He is a very gentle and loyal person. Fugaku turned to face her, and she gave him a beseeching look. You know I wouldn't vouch for anyone who had the potential to hurt Sasuke. Fugaku gazed at her for a while, but Makoto spoke first. Noriko-chan, do you realize what you are saying? She asked, turning to face Sasuke. You want to marry a man? She then asked. Itachi's uninterested voice called out to them all, Mother. Makoto turned to her cherished oldest son in astonishment. She had not thought Itachi would comment on the situation. When Itachi gave Noriko a stern look, Makoto flushed. Both of us know that you wish for us to settle down with nice women and sire heirs for the Uchiha clan for you to dote over. The room's lone blonde merely grinned with laughter. However, we have Sasuke interests to consider here and if he wishes for this. With narrowed eyes, Fugaku interrupted Itachi and said, Sasuke. I will meet this Haku. If I feel he is suitable enough for you and our family, I will allow him into our clan. Itachi raised an eyebrow in mild surprise as Sasuke's eyes grew wide. That will take time. If you plan to propose marriage to him tonight, then I do not approve. You will have to wait until I am certain that he is suitable. Itachi put a hand on the younger Uchiha's shoulder to silence him as he grimaced and opened his mouth to object. Sasuke winced, aware that Itachi was upset that he had kept that from him. I think that is okay, Sasuke. After all, I haven't met this mysterious lover of yours that only Namikaze-san and your other friends know about. Slowly, Sasuke said, all right. He glanced at Noriko, who was frowning. Sasuke was aware that she would concur with his father in spite of everything. Although his parents had not met him, she was acquainted with Haku and had met him multiple times. Prior to fulfilling his request, they had the right to get to know him. Well, all is settled. Now Zuki can stop sulking anxiously and try to enjoy his party, Noriko said with a sudden smile. Makoto grinned at her scowling son as Fugaku shook his head and laughed. Dobi. Teme. Noriko protruded her tongue at him. The house was quiet on this cold morning. Itachi was aware that everyone was asleep, including his father, who had risen early. Because Sasuke's love interest was there, the party, which ended late the other night, was only vaguely interesting. As he sipped his coffee, he reflected on Momochi Haku. He was definitely a fascinating individual. In contrast to Sasuke's impatient and haughty manner, he was kind and understanding. While Fugaku had been a little reserved and had been closely observing the man, Makoto had taken to him right away. Itachi had wanted to focus more on Haku, but his eyes kept going to Noriko instead. There was no one who could match her. She was the center of attention whenever she was present. He was distracted from his thoughts by the sound of light footsteps, and he looked up just in time to see Noriko enter the kitchen. When he saw her, his lips quirked. With her bright hair pulled back in an untidy ponytail, her drowsy eyes sparkling with tears, and her oversized pajamas, she looked adorable. He whispered, Ohayu, Namikaze-san. She gave him a sleepy look before whispering back. She looked as if she would much rather sleep than be awake, and she sat down heavily on the chair in front of him, massaging her temples. You seem as though you should be sleeping, Namikaze-san. He said softly, everyone else is. He arched an eyebrow at her as she poured herself some coffee. She looked at her watch, shook her head, and sighed, suppressing a yawn. Unfortunately, I have a lot of work to do today, many appointments and meetings. I need to leave in an hour. It was only 5:30 in the morning, so the question was, this early? As she put her head on the table, she sighed and raked her fingers through her hair, complaining, Sasuke didn't let me go home last night because it was too late. That bastard. She nodded, I need to go home first, pick up my laptop, and get appropriately dressed for a day of work before going to office. Itachi said, shall I drive you to your home then? With a faint laugh. No, Noriko grinned at him and said, thanks for the offer, but Shino left my car behind. I can drive myself home. Itachi merely nodded, and they had a brief discussion. It was a miracle. Itachi wasn't the type to talk a lot, but it was impossible to avoid Noriko. They talked about a variety of topics, including their occupations, hobbies, Sasuke's music, and Fugaku's surprisingly simple response to his request. Before long, Noriko had almost forgotten her sleepiness and was speaking to him with enthusiasm. Her lips occasionally curled into smirks or stretched into grins, and occasionally she gave him those magnificent smiles. Her delicate little hands moved to highlight particular points. Itachi had never encountered someone so captivating. Itachi couldn't help but regret it when it came time for her to go. He knew from their conversations that she had an equally busy schedule as he did. Unless something about Sasuke came up again, there was very little chance that they would meet again anytime soon. It was hilarious to watch her get into her opulent Mercedes Benz and drive away while still wearing her pajamas. He was amused by her lack of etiquette and did not question her about it. His mother entered the room while he was still reading the news in the kitchen. He felt her tender fingers running through his hair as he looked up. Before pouring herself a cup of coffee, she said, Good morning, sweetheart. I have been informed that Noriko Chan has already departed, she said with a smile. She has. Itachi replied, she told me that she had a busy day and needed to leave early. I don't suppose she ate anything before she left, Makoto sighed. At her worried look, Itachi scowled and said, just drank coffee. Why? Is something the matter? She is such a bright and happy girl that it pains me to see her so lonely. It is always work and coming home at night to a dark, lonely house. Makoto shook her head and said, no, it just makes me uneasy that she lives alone with no one else to take care of her. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Itachi returned to his newspaper and said, she is a grown woman, mother. Makoto smiled at him. Yes, she is, but unlike you, Itachi. She is not exactly suited for this. She is very capable, intelligent, but I think work will suck life away from her. They turned to face Fugaku as another voice added, it is her father's legacy. He sat next to his son and nodded to Itachi, saying, she cannot abandon it. He then let his wife serve him coffee. She gave up a lot to be where she is. However, Itachi said, pausing to think about his father. When his wife opened her mouth to object, Fugaku shook his head and said, Sasuke and Noriko will never happen. You must realize that. Fugaku grimly scowled and said, I think it is time that we started looking for an appropriate match for her, Makoto. Sasuke complained from the doorway, appearing a little drowsy, it is about time you realize that. What are we talking about? After passing him his coffee, Makoto said, getting Noriko settled. Sasuke breathed a sigh of relief, that is a distant dream. I have tried to encourage Noriko to consider Neji, he does like and respect her but she will not listen. Kiba is out of question. I will not trust him with my Noriko, ever. Shikamaru would have been good for her as well but he is engaged to Gaara's sister and Gaara is hardly appropriate for her. You have thought of this, Fugaku said, raising an eyebrow. Itachi leaned back with a slight frown between his brows as Sasuke nodded. Yes. I don't like her living alone either but what can I do? She will not listen to me when I ask her to move in with us. Doesn't want to impose. Sasuke grumbled and pulled back. We could not make it any more clear that we consider her a part of our family but she just doesn't get it. Makoto breathed deeply, she has gotten used to living alone. I blame Jiraiya for this. At the mention of the well-known author, Itachi raised an eyebrow. Jiraiya? His eyes narrowed as the youngest Uchiha said, not that he is suited for that responsibility. The man cannot take care of himself, much less his goddaughter. The last time I saw him visit Noriko was about 2 years ago. Sasuke nodded. He is Noriko's godfather. Uchiha shook his head, as of right now, she is very busy with some important negotiations. I don't. Itachi's phone rang, interrupting Sasuke. Before the call came, Itachi muttered, excuse me. The only person who would dare call him at that hour of the morning would be his secretary. Itachi sighed after a short exchange of words. It was time to forget about the fascinating Noriko and focus on his task. After thinking that final, somewhat disheartening thought, Itachi got up and departed from his family's presence to prepare for the day. It was dark in the room. The figure on a large bed was illuminated by the pale moonlight, and the air was heavy with the odor of cigarettes. While his lover gazed at him languidly from the bed, Itachi leaned against the railing and gazed thoughtfully up at the sky. What's got you all bothered? Itachi gave Kakashi a quick glance before returning his focus to the orb that ruled the night sky. I'm not bothered. As Kakashi leaned back and stretched languidly, looking thoughtfully at the ceiling, there was a faint chuckle. He ran his fingers through his silvery hair and said, you're not usually this thoughtful. I hardly think that it's work bothering you and the only person who you pensively think about is Sasuke. What has the brat done this time? Itachi's mouth quirked with laughter. He has introduced me to a fascinating riddle, he pondered before answering. What do you know of Momochi Haku, Kakashi? The reporter raised an eyebrow. The fashion designer? Itachi bowed his head, and Sasuke's soon-to-be husband. After a pause, Kakashi burst out laughing. He looked amusedly at Itachi's back and muttered, ah. Big brother instincts. Nothing noteworthy, if you're digging for dirt. He laughed, all I know that he's the adopted son of Momochi Zabuza. It's known that he was the sole survivor of the Yanagi family tragedy. Itachi gave Kakashi a stern look and said, he's the Yanagi heir? Kakashi gave nod. Indeed he is. As you know, they are very big in the fashion industry and Haku is their principal designer. He actually runs the business but most only know of his skills as a designer. I won't ask how Sasuke, our Sasuke, stumbled upon such a character. Itachi hummed. He is rather different. Kakashi arched a brow and laughed, that'd make headlines. The prim and proper pianist, Sasuke and the eccentric designer Haku. Don't say anything until everything is official, Kakashi. If I hear a peep of this in the news, consider yourself without a career, said the liquid ebony eyes as they slowly looked at Kakashi. Kakashi held up his hands in protection. I won't say a word. Before returning his focus to the night sky, Itachi hummed. Is there another reason why you're standing there, looking so pensive? Kakashi responded, you've been oddly detached for 2 weeks now. Shall I shower you with attention then? Itachi asked, glancing at him. Kakashi looked at him intently and raised a brow. There was a slow smirk on the older man's lips. Someone finally caught your interest, Itachi? The quick response was, I don't know what you were talking about, too quickly. Kakashi sat up and laughed. He waved away Itachi's piercing glare as if it didn't matter, saying, this is the first time I've thought of you as cute. With a playful smirk, he said, Your protest was too swift and too strong, my dear Uchiha. You know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're worried about injuring my feelings, don't be. Neither of us considers this thing between us to be anything serious. Itachi hesitated a second. It's about Sasuke's best friend. Kakashi hummed. Who is he? Itachi clarified. She. Namikaze Noriko. Kakashi became agitated for the first time during the night. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at Itachi in surprise. Namikaze Noriko? The Namikaze Noriko? He raised his eyebrows. Your brother sure does make friends in high places. She was recently rated to be one of Japan's most successful women. Crossing his arms and leaning against the railing with a contemplative frown, Itachi raised an eyebrow and said, I'm well aware of that, Kakashi. I was simply surprised to see how fond my entire family is of her. Mother dotes over her at every turn, and father. Itachi looked slightly perplexed. She has my father wrapped around her finger. Kakashi gave a shrug. I can't tell you much about her. She's very smart, tends to stay out of the spotlight. Kakashi relaxed and said, a straight, down.to. Earthwoman. Attends very few parties, hasn't been involved in any controversy. She charms everyone who has spoken to her. And, Kakashi slyly glanced at Itachi, she's considered to be very beautiful, a bit unusual perhaps, with her blonde hair and blue eyes. Itachi replied, her grandmother wasn't Japanese. Somehow, both she and her father inherited her grandmother's coloring. Don't be so bland, Itachi. I've a feeling you are attracted to her, laughed Kakashi. Itachi raised an eyebrow, then turned to give him a stern look. I think your sore behind will disagree with that assessment. Kakashi grinned broadly and said, oh. You developed a sense of humor. I've got to meet this woman who was able to bring such a change in you. He waved it off again, snickering at Itachi's cold glare. You're the first person I've met who's questioning his sexuality 12 years after admitting that he's gay. Itachi responded bluntly, you're just making assumptions, Kakashi. But there's some truth to your thoughts, he said, pausing, turning away from his lover and frowning slightly as he gazed up at the night sky. This may just be curiosity, but I can't deny that she has been on my mind for the past 2 weeks. Kakashi brought his cigarette to his lips and leaned back idly. He paused and narrowed his eyes at Itachi before saying, you'd be a fool to let a woman like that slip. You should try to get to know her better. If it's simple curiosity, then it'd fade when you know her better. If it's really attraction. Itachi hummed, his eyes calculating and narrowed. Well, she already seems to be a part of the family, it becomes my duty to get to know her better. Kakashi replied with a smirk. When Noriko's cell phone rang, she blinked in surprise, then sighed and hoped it wasn't an office call. After a long day of work, she had been practicing her violin. Eager to immerse herself in the joy of music, she was not at all eager to return to the office. Before opening the phone, she took a quick look at the screen and scowled at the strange number. Hello? A voice that sounded somewhat familiar said, Noriko-san. This is Uchiha Itachi speaking. Not anticipating the call, she said, Itachi-san. What a pleasant surprise. How are you? Noriko relaxed in her couch as he asked casually, I'm well, and you? Sasuke said that you've been very busy. Itachi's voice was incredibly appealing. She closed her eyes and sighed, her fatigue leaking into her voice as she said, yes. Unfortunately. Our latest client, one stubborn bastard, and it's an important deal for us, so I needed to handle it myself. We finally signed the contract this morning and I took the day off. Thank God, I was ready to rip my hair out. Well, I'm fortunate then. His voice had a faint purr, and Noriko's eyes widened as she felt a sudden chill go through her. Oh, I was wondering if I could tempt you to join me for dinner this evening, he suggested, unless of course, you have other commitments. Noriko hesitated, unsure. She was definitely surprised by the offer. No, actually, was her hesitant response. For a moment, she pondered whether asking him why he wanted to meet her was impolite. I'm free this evening. He sounded so assured, and yet here she was, nearly ready to shut up. Excellent. Shall I come to pick you up at somewhere around 6? Why did the older Uchiha make her feel so uneasy? Their previous encounter had been sufficiently amicable. Noriko-san. Did he sound slightly seductive when he whispered her name like that, or was it just her imagination? Yes. She hurriedly replied, that's fine. She regained her composure quickly. May I ask where we'll be dining? Have you heard of Hinokazaka? Noriko's forehead raised. Itachi wanted to impress whom? At the Ritz, Carlton? Yes. His tone was somewhat amused. Unfortunately, it's more of a business dinner than anything. I'm meeting an important client, Mr. Tachibana and his wife, for dinner. They happen to be quite normal individuals and were not to discuss business during dinner on his wife's orders. Noriko relaxed and said, Oh, in Uchiha speak, normal meant either dull or obnoxious, and occasionally both. Fortunately, she was in her element because she had frequently been compelled to attend similar dinners for business purposes. She laughed and said, "You're looking to ruin my evening, Itachi-san?" Itachi laughed, and Noriko held her breath once more as a chill went through her. "I was hoping that we'd save both our evenings by accompanying each other." She laughed. "You forget that I don't need to attend this dinner engagement. You'd owe me a favor." Noriko felt ashamed as she felt her cheeks flush. "Ah." He breathed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You may ask me anything in return and I do everything in my power to grant you your wish. After all, you'll be gracing me with your very charming presence while you'll be unfortunate enough to suffer 3, much less pleasing, companions." "Who's being charming now, Itachi-san? If I didn't know better, I'd say that you were flirting with me," she grinned. He purred and Noriko closed her eyes, asking, "Is that so, Noriko-san?" His voice was like rich, dark chocolate. Maddening. "Will you accompany me?" he asked earnestly, his voice devoid of any hint of humor. "Of course." She smiled slightly and said gravely, "I thought it was obvious. Should I dress to impress?" she asked. "I hope that I haven't imposed myself by inviting you to a business engagement," Itachi said with a hint of intimacy in his voice, and Noriko bit her lip. "To tell you the truth, I wanted to have a private dinner with you sometime soon when this offer from Tachibana-san came." Itachi laughed and said, "You'll always impress whether you're dressed for it or not." "There's no imposition." Noriko whispered, "I'll make time for you as I do for Sasuke," with a gentle smile. "I'm grateful. Then I'll see you at 6. "Yes, definitely," was her firm response. Itachi finally whispered, "Well, good day," and ended the call. Talking to Itachi was not at all like talking to Sasuke. With Sasuke, it was friendly banter, mockery, and affection that came from years of strong friendship. Noriko leaned back, staring at the ceiling in a daze. She hadn't expected Itachi to invite her, and she hadn't even expected Itachi to remember her. She scowled as she relived the entire conversation in her mind. Itachi was different. He had been amused but aloof when they had first met, and she had felt at ease because being around him was like being around a distant acquaintance. She wasn't blind, though, and she found Itachi very attractive, but her reactions to him during that conversation went beyond what she was used to. No one had ever been able to make her feel so uneasy with a few words and a magical voice. The conversation they just had seemed to have an intimate undertone that confused her. Noriko moaned and shook her head, remembering that the man was gay and not wanting to expose herself to heartbreak. She sighed and looked at her watch. It was almost 4, and no matter what Itachi said, she had to be dressed to impress those business acquaintances of his. Running her fingers through her silky blonde hair, she wondered why Itachi hadn't asked someone more familiar to him. Such meetings required a keen sense of gestures and an understanding of silent cues. She needed to know what Itachi's intentions were with regard to his client so that she wouldn't say something hurtful. She got up and walked to her bedroom, shaking her head because she had to choose an evening dress. After searching her closet frantically for 30 minutes, she sat down on her bed and frowned. Why was she so upset? A simple black dress would have sufficed, but she persisted in her search for something better, something more appealing. As she selected an empire-cut dress in a deep crimson hue, she asked herself, just whose attention do I want to attract? She closed her eyes for a moment to gather herself, then got up and walked to the shower. She finished bathing and dressing quickly, but she was unaware of how quickly the time had gone by. Noriko had just finished pinning her hair when the bell rang, so she started and looked at the clock before gathering her courage and approaching the intercom. "Itachi-san? Are you prepared, Noriko-san?" With a grudging pause, the girl said, "Unfortunately, I'm not." She smiled sheepishly and said, You've probably experienced this with other girls. Come upstairs. I'll hold the door open for you. I'll be right back." Someone laughed and said, "All right. I'll be there shortly." She walked over to the door and opened it, leaving it slightly open, then whispered, "Okay." Noriko was just putting on her shoes and finishing her hair when Itachi arrived at her house. She hardly looked at him as he leaned against the wall and studied her carefully. "Just let me finish this and we're all set. I'm hoping there's still time." A gratified smile curling at his lips, the Uchiha said, "I'm a bit early so there's nothing to worry about." Her blonde coloring contrasted beautifully with her deep red dress that ended just on her knees, and while a small portion of her hair was pulled up, the rest of her riotous golden curls flowed down her back. She looked beautiful, and there was no longer any sense of restraint or conformity. When she was done putting on her shoes, Noriko looked up and grinned at him, asking, "Are you overdressed or underdressed?" she asked teasingly as she stood up and critically examined the mirror. Her skin glowed in the warm lights of her house, and her makeup was so thin that it was hardly noticeable. Before extending his hand to her, he said, "Perfect." He looked at her with hot eyes and remarked, "Not many can resist such a vision. I realize why Sasuke seems so protective of you. You're hoping that my feminine wiles will soften Tachibana-san?" she asked, smirking slyly as she arched a brow at him. Despite being married, Tachibana Hideaki is a notorious womanizer. "You're mistaken," he said stiffly, tensing and narrowing his eyes. "I'm afraid, Noriko-san, you'll find that Sasuke and I aren't so different when it comes to certain aspects of our personalities." She paused uncertainly, looking at his tense form and frowning. If it had been Sasuke, he would have recognized her subtle sarcasm and mockery, but it appears that Itachi didn't. "Look," she murmured awkwardly, "I didn't mean that seriously." As they stepped into the elevator, he gave her a sharp look and said, "Maybe inviting you to a business dinner was a mistake." He scowled and said, "I'm afraid I've given you the wrong impression. I should have been more considerate." Noriko gave him a questioning glance. "Tachibana-san's timing was unfortunate, and it's even more unfortunate that I cannot refuse him," Itachi said after pausing for a moment. Noriko froze at the emphasis. "You're very precious to my family, Noriko-san. So much so that you're now a part of it. I was hoping to dine with you today, alone, but I'm quite busy for the next 2 weeks. I want to give you the same level of consideration that I'm willing to give Sasuke." "You don't have to," said Noriko, shaking her head. "You know that?" As they left the building and made their way to his car, she said to him, "Sasuke is your brother. I'm just his closest friend. I am aware of how busy you are, man." Itachi stopped and stared at her for a moment, his hooded, enigmatic eyes disturbing, but Noriko was unable to look away. He opened the passenger, sighed for her and turned away without a word. Since she had only met Itachi once and Sasuke frequently talked about his brother, she scowled as she slid into her seat, wondering what exactly Itachi was up to. She deduced that Itachi wasn't a fool, and that practically everything he did had a purpose, according to Sasuke. "The real question is whether he reveals his motives to others or not," she said, leaning back in her seat and looking at Itachi. "Maybe we ought to begin anew?" she asked softly, offering him a charming smile that was so genuine that Itachi relaxed. "How have things been between Sasuke and you?" As he drove out of the parking lot, Itachi replied, "Better. He has changed quite a bit, but in some aspects, he's still a clingy brat." "Oh man, I'd pay to see his face when you tell him that," laughed Noriko. She looked at him with amused sparkles in her eyes and said, "He's a little too possessive. What Haku-chan goes through is beyond my comprehension. He is truly a saint for being so patient with Sasuke." Itachi grimaced as he looked at the traffic ahead and smirked. "Oh, I concur." He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel and said, "I'm still uncertain about Haku-san." "No worries," Noriko shrugged. "It took me a while to accept Haku-chan as well. You're more reasonable than I was, so you'd probably take less time." In addition, Noriko smiled. "The bastard is a putty in Haku-chan's hands despite his cool, untouchable demeanor. Before I learned to accept it, I was uneasy for a long time when I saw him so enamored." As they arrived at their destination, he muttered, "Well, we'll just have to see." He raised an eyebrow at his companion and asked, "Ready?" After snorting, Noriko forced a phony, endearing smile on her lips and said, "Let's woo the clients." Smirking, Itachi stepped out of the car and held out his arm to her, saying, "I'm assuming that your charming sense of humor is absent when you're with clients." "Well, my friends say that my real personality is quite annoying, so if I do be myself, I'll lose a great deal of clients," she said, placing her hand on his arm as they entered the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. The flash of cunning in his eyes, the seductive curl of his lips, and the measured movements of his body were as alluring as flame was to a moth. Itachi laughed, and Noriko realized for the first time that there was something very deliciously dangerous about her best friend's older brother. She turned away, biting her lip. She couldn't just fall in love with every handsome man who approached her, she had to maintain her poise. If she did, heartbreak would be her fate. With a throbbing headache, Itachi went into his penthouse. He had hoped that he and Noriko would still enjoy themselves in spite of the clients. He had been mistaken. It turned out that Mrs. Tachibana was as much of a flirt as her husband. Seeing Hideaki attempt to win Noriko over in front of his wife while the latter attempted to hurl herself at him was horrifying. Overall, the evening had been a complete bust, and Noriko appeared to have endured hell rather than a cordial dinner meeting. After they parted ways with the clients, Itachi made the decision to take her for a quick walk rather than letting her go home right away. That proved to be the wisest choice. After strolling through a peaceful and picturesque small park for some time, Noriko's sharp sense of humor and radiant smiles returned. He folded up his sleeves, tossed aside his coat, and absently flicked on the light switch. After taking off his shoes, he stopped and looked up. Sasuke was sitting idly on his couch, tinkering with a chess piece. When he had calmed down, he said, "Oto." He wasn't very irritated, but he was surprised. He had allowed Sasuke to come and go as he wanted, and he had given him the keys to his house. It was the first time Sasuke had used that privilege, though. As he spoke, Sasuke moved the chess piece, his voice low but somehow containing a hint of danger. "When I decided to take a walk after a day's work, I didn't expect to see you with Noriko on your arm." Itachi sat down and raised an eyebrow. "So you saw us?" "Ni-san," he murmured, glancing at him. "What exactly are your intentions towards my Noriko?" "Your Noriko?" asked the older Uchiha, who appeared amused. Sasuke looked him in the eye and said, "Now, answer the question. My Noriko. She isn't yours yet, and until she is, I have every right to question you." "She's a charming company," Itachi said, pausing before shrugging. "I decided to take her with me. It was a business dinner." It appeared that the younger Uchiha was not persuaded. When Itachi leaned forward to look at him with amusement, he frowned and said, "I know what you're like. We may have been living apart for years, but that doesn't mean that I don't know you. I don't believe that my intentions can be so easily read. You're attracted to her." Itachi became motionless and squinted at his brother. Sasuke, on the other hand, continued, "You met her only 2 weeks ago. You spoke to her only a couple of times during that evening. After that, I know you didn't have any contact with her. Noriko would have told me if you did. I know that we don't have any business ties with Noriko's company. So why would you abruptly take her out for a business dinner?" The elder Uchiha remained silent. With seriousness, Sasuke questioned, "Do you know just how telling your silence is, Ni-san? You don't do things randomly. Noriko has been on your mind, hasn't she? Answer me honestly." He spoke softly. Itachi looked at Sasuke for a while. In any other situation, he would have brushed his younger brother aside since it was a personal matter. But Sasuke was correct. Noriko was very important to him. He had to answer to his brother about that specific woman. Itachi replied quietly, "I've been thinking about her a lot for the past 2 weeks." He leaned back and crossed his legs tastefully, adding, "I hoped that getting to know her better would dispel that annoyance." "Did it?" Sasuke asked, leaning forward. The elder Uchiha appeared thoughtful, saying, "If anything, I fear I may have encouraged it. My own responses to her are rather intriguing." Itachi shrugged, "Not yet." "Intriguing in what way?" asked Sasuke, raising an eyebrow. "I feel a certain degree of possessiveness," Itachi stated, looking inwardly. That was obvious when Tachibana-san flirted with her despite the presence of his wife. "Curiously, it wasn't like what I feel for you. With you, there is a sense of protectiveness. With her, it was purely illogical." Sasuke sighed. "Possessiveness? You felt that she was yours? That Tachibana-san was encroaching in your territory?" With a sardonic expression, Itachi said, "Yes. That's the blunt manner of putting it." "Anything else?" the younger Uchiha asked, tilting his head to the side and shrugging. "Noriko is not here, so no one's going to be offended." "There was attraction. On both parts, one believe." Itachi continued, "She's remarkably composed and in control of her reactions, but sometimes she slips." He sighed. "Quite beautiful, those demure blushes of hers." "Demure is not a word that I'd associate with her," said Sasuke with a laugh. With a faint smile on his lips, Itachi opened his eyes. "Ah, but Otuto, I think she is quite shy when it comes to such things." His eyes sparkled. "Her inexperience is most charming." "You, my dear Ni-san, are besotted." Itachi sneered, "Not yet." However, as he raked his fingers through his hair and examined his emotions intently. "There is a possibility of it happening." To Sasuke's astonishment, he acknowledged. He paused, searching for the correct word. "Given how brief our acquaintance is, I am. The intensity of these feelings is not something that I can ignore." With a frown, Sasuke said, confused. "This is highly illogical, Sasuke." Itachi replied, "And it's completely uncharacteristic of me." Incredulously, Sasuke whispered, "Kami. Sama, help me. Am I to advise you on love, of all things?" he asked, glancing at his brother to try to grasp Itachi's emotions. "Ni-san, if you're going to cut and dissect everything in hopes of trying to understand your reactions, then I'm telling you right now that you're doomed to failure." "I'm not a fool." Itachi grumbled, "I'm well aware of the illogicality of emotions. These feelings are occurring too soon for me to lay real weight in their authenticity, Sasuke." The younger brother bowed his head slightly in agreement and scowled. "Yes, but surely there is nothing wrong in pursuing it?" With a raised eyebrow, Itachi asked, "You're encouraging me?" "I'd search the entire country and I wouldn't find anyone more suitable for you than her," said the younger Uchiha, shrugging. Sincerely surprised, Itachi said, "Me? I thought you'd be more concerned for Noriko." "I am." Sasuke responded quickly, "But I trust you, Ni-san, and you've never betrayed that trust. Besides, there's no one better suited for Noriko either. I know you. If you really feel that there will be no future in the relationship, you'd stop it from progressing to the point where either of you could get hurt. There is no one else that would trust Noriko without a single shred of reserve." Itachi paused when he thought, "How can you be sure that this is not one of my usual conquests?" and bowed his head slightly before saying, "Your trust is appreciated." Chuckled, "After the conversation we just had, I'd be a fool to believe so. Besides, you know that I'll kill you if you hurt Noriko like that. Moreover, father would break every single bone in your body if you even harm a hair on her pretty little head. She is his daughter in all but blood and you know it." He laughed, "I saw the way you looked at her. I saw those judicious little touches that you never bestow on any woman but our mother. I saw how your arm remained wrapped about her waist. Not once did you seem disinterested. Not once did you shift your attention away from her." Itachi was slightly taken aback by his brother's ability to read him. His eyes gleamed with laughter as his lips formed a smirk and he relaxed in his chair. My. He was purring, "It seems that my baby brother has become quite courageous and wise." After snorting, Sasuke got up and shrugged on his abandoned coat. Glancing down at the seated Itachi, he grinned and said, "Well, my curiosity is satisfied for now. I don't care how you plan to woo her Ni-san, but I'll give you some advice." His older brother was staring at him suspiciously. "Always assume that she is twice as smart as you are because if you don't you'll slip. She is very perceptive when she wants to be. She is stubborn as a mule and prideful as a finely bred horse. Disrespect her once and she will never forget. She may forgive but she will never forget. And finally," Sasuke sighed, "don't play games with her and lose her trust, Ni-san, because if you do, you'll never regain it. I know that you like playing mind games and that's fine. That'd probably excite her just as much as it excites you, but know your limits." With a sly smile, Itachi said, "I'll remember that." Before making his way to the door, Sasuke nodded and said, "Good night, Ni-san." Itachi poured himself a drink and watched him leave. He got up and entered his study as soon as he heard the door snap shut. He took his usual seat behind a big, elaborate desk and flicked on the lights. He closed his eyes, leaned back, and thought about his dinner partner. It dawned on him for the first time just what a woman could do to a man. Beautiful eyes, sly smiles, and a sweet disposition had all managed to captivate him. He was well aware of how powerful his feelings were, even though he had told Sasuke that he didn't think they were real. He was uneasy about that. Itachi was an entrepreneur. He never made investments in transactions that didn't promise a profit of some kind. He knew that if a relationship did form between him and Noriko, he would benefit greatly. First, the issue of his father's heirs will be resolved. Second, Namikaze Noriko's family would only gain from his excellent reputation and strong connections. Third, even if Noriko didn't have a sizable income of her own and the whole Namikaze empire to support her, he was aware that she wouldn't be a fortune hunter. He opened his eyes and turned on his computer, allowing it to boot up while he once more lost himself in his thoughts. He saw the relationship's many useful advantages, but this was the first time he had ever invested his emotions. Everything or nothing was how he perceived Noriko to be. She would put her all into a relationship, but she would expect the same in return. A casual association would be impossible with her. It would resemble what his parents had in common. A strong, enduring relationship built on friendship, trust, and love. As he checked his inbox for mail, he muttered to himself, "This is ridiculous. I am getting ahead of myself." He opened the email Kakashi had sent him absently, then stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Uchiha, my dearest, before I received a call from a friend stating that you had taken Namikaze Noriko to a business dinner, I had no idea how hopeless you were in everything deemed romantic. I feel so embarrassed. Have I not taught you anything? Instead of courting a successful, attractive woman who is within your grasp, you invite her to a business dinner. In any case, I've made the decision to assist you. It's nothing too drastic, so don't worry. It required a lot of work, but I was able to gather some valuable information by doing some research, meeting people with surprisingly loose tongues, and forcing some to get stone drunk. Itachi, you are a very intelligent man. I think you'll be able to use this information effectively. Enjoy yourself, Kakashi." Itachi scowled as he launched the application and downloaded the Word document that was attached. He found a list in the document, which surprised him. It disclosed a lot of pointless details, but Itachi saw that it was helpful for someone getting ready to court a woman. Kakashi obviously wanted him to know what kinds of presents Itachi could give her. Despite the fact that it was utterly, Uncharacteristically cheesy of him to genuinely value such information, he read it with a slight smirk. Roses are one of Noriko's favorite flowers, but she has very specific taste in color. She adores dark, nearly black crimson roses, as well as white and purple ones. While yellow, orange, and any other color roses are viewed with reluctance, pink roses are viewed with mild distaste. This took Itachi by surprise. It had surprised him that Noriko liked flowers. Her disposition suggested that she wouldn't be interested in such unimportant things. He had been wrong, of course, but he wasn't all that disappointed. Blue and orange are her favorite hues. She dislikes black, but she also doesn't like white. She doesn't like either of them. No pink again. He was not surprised by that. She was fond of orange, almost obsessively, as Sasuke has already hinted. He was a little disappointed, of course, given his love of black. He read on, shaking his head to get rid of that absurd thought. She adores diamonds, just like any other woman, but she finds colored diamonds fascinating. You can call it yellow, green, black, or blue. Diamonds with color. He concurred with her, although he thought colorless diamonds would look equally beautiful on her. Blue diamonds go well with her stunning eyes. With a faint smirk, he whispered to himself, "I'll wait a couple of months before considering gifting her a pair of blue diamond earrings." Although books are mostly wasted on her because she only reads when absolutely necessary, she enjoys action and adventure novels. She'll read anything about samurai and ninjas. Somehow unsurprised, he laughed. She was Sasuke's complete opposite. There was never a day that his brother did not read. He kept a book on his bedside table at all times. The composers Paganini and Vivaldi are her favorites. Don't bother purchasing her CDs, though. Every music lover would be envious of her extensive music collection. The best places to go on dates are temples, historical sites, and concerts. I refer to dull classical music concerts when I say that. If you take her to a rock concert, she will dump you the very next day because she has perfect pitch. It shouldn't be an issue. Their tastes appeared to be similar. She has a strong fascination with kimonos, even though her friends think she's a tomboy. She has quite a few, but she won't wear them in public. She gathers them. She dresses up in these exquisitely embroidered kimonos and looks at herself in the mirror. Based on what I can find, I think it's a weird kind of vanity. He furrowed his brow and briefly closed his eyes to visualize Noriko wearing a stunning, vibrantly colored kimono. His lips curled at the edges into a seductive smile as an unanticipated chill of desire ran down his spine. He opened his eyes with a gleam, eager to see his vision realized. She would be stunningly gorgeous, graceful, and captivating in ways Itachi could not wait to witness. Although ramen is her favorite food, Sasuke's influence has negatively impacted her. She also loves onigiri a lot. Although she enjoys sake as well, she hardly ever drinks it. I believe she has a slight anime crush on Sephiroth, a character from the Final Fantasy video games. Given that the man is a psychopath who is bent on destroying the entire world and cultivating an unsettling god complex, good luck with that. To impress her, you wouldn't go around killing innocent people with an absurdly big odachi, would you? Itachi snorted, but he found it hilarious. He decided to investigate even though he had no idea who or what this Sephiroth was. Some claim that she is fiercely competitive and detests defeat. Actually, whenever she does, she tends to pout. When she wants to gain the upper hand, she will fight to the death. Itachi would imagine it. It fit her disposition. Although he was aware that she was capable of being mature when necessary, he still expected her to exhibit some playful childishness. I'm still looking. If I discover anything more, I'll let you know. Itachi crossed his legs gracefully, leaned back in his chair, and gazed impassively at the computer screen. He didn't really need the information Kakashi had given him. He was aware that gifts and trinkets wouldn't be enough to convince Noriko. But he told himself, it wouldn't hurt to indulge her a little. He would need to give her thoughtful and cautious presents. If it had been anyone else, he would have just purchased the priciest present he could find and been done with it. But with Noriko, it would be more about the idea than the cost. After all, she could afford everything he could. They were on an equal footing financially. Furthermore, he would make his intentions toward her very apparent by giving her courting gifts. It would force her to consider him more than just a friend. As he made his choice, he relaxed and closed his eyes. He would follow Kakashi's overt cue. Namikaze Noriko would be courted by him. When the intercom rang, Noriko stopped. Neji, Tenten, and Hinata, her guests, also paused, appearing slightly perplexed. She put down her chopsticks and walked over to the intercom, whispering, "Pardon me." "Yes." Amused, the security guard said, "Namikaze Sama, there's a special delivery for you. Shall I send it up?" She wasn't expecting any mail, was she? Noriko scowled and said, "All right." A unique delivery? What might it be? Her doorbell rang before it had arrived. Her friends were starting to wonder, too. As she opened the door, they were staring at her. She froze, completely taken aback. A delivery man with a bouquet of angelic white roses stood in front of her. She was astounded by the beauty of the arrangement. As if they had been hand-picked to create the ideal lil bouquet, the roses appeared to glow, all in full bloom. She accepted the flowers from the beaming delivery man with wide eyes and signed his sheet absently, so enthralled with the flowers that she didn't realize he was gone. "Who sent you that, I wonder?" Tenten teased softly. My. With a suspicion growing, Noriko swallowed uneasily. She inhaled deeply and unfolded the card that came with it. "Noriko, I hope you enjoy these roses as much as I enjoyed having you around last night. I'm excited for more evenings like this one in the future. Just the two of us. I apologize if I'm getting ahead of myself. Even though it wasn't the best evening, having you around was a welcome diversion from the monotony of work. I am enchanted by you. Yours, Itachi." As she gazed at the card, the name of Itachi slipped out of her mouth in surprise. Her eyes widened and she looked at a postscript in small, readable handwriting. "Even though you are bright and colorful, the white rose best suits you. It is stunning, mysterious, and endearingly innocent. Noriko, wouldn't you agree?" Noriko tried to calm her racing heart as she felt a flush come over her cheeks. This was not what she had anticipated from Itachi. She had told herself that Itachi was simply being polite the night before. That the arm around her wasn't a possessive one. That those eyes weren't fascinated observing everything she did. However, "What are you doing, Itachi?" Noriko murmured to herself. "Kami. Sama."
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.